Now let's take a look at 3 soloing ideas that you can apply to a blues. I mentioned earlier with comping that instead of just comping randomly through the changes, that you can create a solid riff, whether it's in octaves or harmonized chords, to create some unity through an entire chorus, create a shout effect, and that can really take it up a few notches. If the band is really cooking and you're live and everybody's feeling it, you can do that to take it to the next level. But you can also do that in your soloing. So instead of just kind of rambling through a scale or different ideas, you can create one idea and repeat that through the entire chorus. And that's what's happening in this first lick. So what we're doing here is we're just basically playing an idea. There's nothing wrong with using that as a solo line. But to maybe fatten it up a little bit, I'll just maybe use a double stop. I'll put a sixths on there. And that's kind of like the magic note, especially with earlier blues and swing styles. Players like Charlie Christian, they use that note all the time, So, for example, we're on F7, and the D is the 6th or the 13th, however you think, choose to think about it. And that note really works well over an F chord and the B flat, because it's the third of that. But we're not too worried about that. We're just going for a vibe and a sound. So what we can do now is play a double stop. So over the F we have this. And then just play a riff based on that. A 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. And then just keep repeating that. And. So, essentially it sounds the same as our shout, comping that we did back in the comping section, but you can do the same thing when you're soloing. In fact, you'll notice that there's almost 2 measures of space, and taking this approach, playing a repeating riff as your solo idea can really leave a lot of room for some conversation in the bandstand, which is always nice. Instead of just filling up every crack with a line or a lick, just leave some space. And you can imagine the drummer, the piano player playing with you. So you've got 3, 4. So that's kind of throwing them like a nice lob over home plate and letting them go from there, and that ultimately makes for a lot more interesting music. So make sure to check that out. Come up with a riff or improvise one on the spot and just repeat that through the entire chorus of blues. All right, for our second lick, our second concept, I mentioned earlier that I always kind of default to thinking about Grant Green when I think about blues, especially in the organ trio setting. And so this idea is creating your own licks with some of your favorite players in mind. So I have a little footnote in my mind of Grant Green, and I'll do a couple of things that remind me of how he might approach something. Of course, it's not going to sound like Grant Green, it'll sound like me playing, but that's kind of what I'm going for. So the point being is that you can be thinking about one of your favorite players, whether it's a blues player, rock player, jazz player, doesn't matter, but you can be thinking of how they might approach something, and then ultimately that goes through your mind and your heart and ultimately your fingers and your strings and your instrument, and it will sound like you, but sort of be a reference to that player. So one of the things that Grant Green would do a lot that I love is balance bebop vocabulary with blues, just straight up blues vocabulary, and use those same articulations that a blues player might do. So for example, if we're just going to play like a blues lick over F, we might have something like this, like a blues scale idea. So what Grant Green might do is approach that first note with a double hammer-on. That's a great thing to do. Just kind of, you could also slide into a note by a half step or a whole step. But what Grant Green and West and a lot of players would do is just do like a double hammer-on into that. And then he would do a quick hammer-on pull-off to finish off that line. That kind of a thing. So wherever you have a note in the scale, you can kind of do a turn, around it. That kind of a thing. So Grant Green would play those ideas a lot. So our second lick is in time, a 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and then in the second measure there, what's happening is we've just got this basic idea, and then we're reinforcing that in the same way we did with our first lick with a double stop, and that double stop is a D, the sixth. So we have just puts a little bit of a vibe on it, just strengthens that note. So the whole thing again is a 1, 2, 3, and maybe something like a piano player would play by playing that double stop. So that's something to check out. And then finally, our third lick will be also in the spirit of Grant Green, a classic bebop turnaround. So, Grant Green was so at home playing the blues, but he was also very much influenced by and inspired by saxophonists, Charlie Parker, Lester Young, all the classic names. So he would oftentimes in the context of a turnaround, which we see in blues as the 2-5 setting up the next chord. So for example, in measure 8, moving to measure 9, we have A minor 7 to D7, moving to G minor 7. That would be a good opportunity, instead of playing a blues idea, to play more of a bebop idea, a kind of a straight ahead lick. And so he would use the rhythm and the notes. So the lick is, and we'll break it down in a second, but the lick is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the first thing to take note of is that bebop phrasing. A real popular rhythm in bebop would be a triplet that's approached by an eighth note. So it's like an eighth note that happens on the end of the beat. So it's like 1, da, 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 1, do, da, 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 da. That's a real common rhythmic vocabulary phrase for bebop players. And so then, thinking along the lines of bebop, instead of playing a scale, you're really kind of outlining the chord by playing its arpeggio. So for the A minor 7, that's exactly what we're going to do. Just play that arpeggio with that rhythm. So we have 1 and 2 and okay? And then we'll outline a real strong chord tone, the third, over the D, which would be F sharp. So, and that sounds like you're going A to D. And then we'll do a little turn around the flat 9. And that's another ornamentation that's really popular in bebop. So the whole line is D. And then, landing on the flat third of G minor, which is a real strong note. So the whole thing again in context is a 1, 2, 3, 4. And we could stay on the B flat for G minor, but it's just nice to make a little wide leap up to the 9th there for some color. So one more time, a 1, 2, 3, and. And by tempering your solos between blues licks ideas, straight out of the blues scale with all those different articulations that we talked about, and those classic bebop ideas, especially around turnarounds, your playing over the blues will have a great balance. You'll have kind of one foot in the blues and one foot in bebop, and it's a really great combination.